No, I can't lose her, not after everything. The icy air tore at his lungs with every desperate stride, the echo of 1,000 Siberian tiger roars still hammering in his mind as he crawled, wounded and exhausted, back to his tent in the white vastness of Yakutia. The promise of safety for his little sister Lena was the only thing keeping him on his feet in the hellish 70°C cold. But the sight that awaited him made his blood run even colder, transforming his brief hope into pure terror. Lena was not safe, but running in a panic, her small, fragile figure pursued by a swift and lethal shadow. Over 700 snow leopards, their hungry yellow eyes gleaming in the icy gloom. Hell had begun anew, and this time, he knew the battle for his sister's life would be his last. Sasha felt a scream tear from his throat, but the sound was swallowed by the merciless wind, a cutting gust that seemed to mock his misery. His body, already battered by the exhausting fight against 1,000 tigers and the extreme 70°C cold, seemed to give way under the weight of this new, overwhelming threat. Every muscle protested. Every bone ached with a sharp pang, but the image of Lena, so small and fragile, running desperately, ignited a furious and unbreakable flame in his chest. He could not fail, not after crawling back from the gates of death with the promise of her safety etched into his soul. His eyes, once blurred by exhaustion and despair, now burned with fierce determination, reflecting the pale light of the snow. The ancestral wisdom of his people, whispered on cold nights by his grandmother, echoed in his mind like a mantra. The Yakut spirit does not break, Sacha. It bends, but never yields. The love for family is the fire that melts the ice. Lena, her heart beating like a war drum in her tiny chest, felt the frozen air burn her nostrils with every gasping breath. Her small feet, already numb and sore, could barely keep up with the frantic pace of her escape, sinking into the deep snow with each step. The shadows of the snow leopards danced around her, a macabre dance of hunt and despair, their slender, muscular bodies moving with lethal grace. She could feel the predator's icy breath getting closer and closer, the low, guttural growl that promised imminent end. A tear froze on her cheek, a pearl of pain and fear, but she dared not look back, keeping her eyes fixed on an invisible point ahead. The only thing driving her was the hope that Sasha, her brave brother, would appear. As he always did, he was her safe harbor, her unwavering rock in the relentless vastness of Yakutia. Sasha, ignoring the searing pain that coursed through every fiber of his body, forced himself to stand, each movement a battle against collapse. The act was slow, but charged with superhuman willpower, a pure manifestation of selfless love. He watched the colossal pack of leopards, a grey and white torrent moving with terrifying agility, surrounding Lena. There were too many, too fast for any direct confrontation that wasn't a futile sacrifice. But sacrifice, he knew, wasn't just about giving one's life. It was also about using every fiber of his existence to divert danger, to buy time. He needed a plan, and fast. His eyes swept the desolate landscape, searching for anything that could serve as a distraction, a weak point in the relentless pursuit. He remembered an ancient lesson about how Yakut hunters used sound and movement to confuse large groups of animals, dispersing them or luring them away from vulnerable prey. It wasn't about fighting with brute force, but about deceiving with cunning. With a last gasp, Sasha picked up a twisted piece of wood that lay near the tent, a remnant of an old campfire, heavy and sturdy. His muscles trembled with the effort to lift it, but he concentrated all his remaining energy, every heartbeat in his exhausted chest. He no longer had his former speed, but he had cunning and courage. He needed to attract the predator's attention, divert them from Lena, even if only for a few precious seconds that could mean the difference between life and death. With a hoarse roar that was barely audible above the wind's lament, Sasha lunged to the opposite side of where Lena was running, a desperate and calculated move. He couldn't run fast, but he could make noise. He struck the piece of wood against the frozen ground, creating a dry, sharp crack that echoed in the oppressive stillness, breaking the silence of the hunt. The sound, though small compared to the size of the pack, was enough for some of the closest leopards to divert their hungry gazes from Lena to him. Their yellow eyes, previously fixed on the smaller prey, now turned to Sasha's stumbling figure, who had become a new and unexpected target. It was an immense risk, a leap into the abyss, but it was the only chance. He had become the new bait, the new point of interest. The pack, for a brief instant, hesitated. Curiosity and predatory instinct divided between two preys. Sasha knew he had to maintain this distraction, even if it meant facing the fury of 700 predators alone, under the watchful eye of his sister, who now for an instant saw him and understood his sacrifice. The colossal pack of snow leopards hesitated. The yellow eyes of hundreds of predators, previously fixed on the fragile Lena, divided between the small fleeing figure and the stumbling Sasha, who brandished the piece of wood. It was a tense, ephemeral pause. Sasha needed to capitalize on the distraction. With an effort that seemed to tear his exhausted muscles, he twisted his torso, raising the wood and striking it again against the compacted snow. A hoarse cry was barely audible above the wind, but the resonant sound and the dry crack echoed, capturing the attention of more leopards dangerously approaching Lena. Lena, her eyes wide with fear and hope, stopped for a second, her breath caught. She saw Sasha, her brother, facing the horde, a beacon of danger. Terror invaded her, making her chest ache and her vision blur with frozen tears. He was exhausted, but his posture, though trembling, radiated unwavering courage and love. "Sasha," she whispered, a frozen prayer. If Sasha was sacrificing himself, she had to make the most of every second. With trembling legs, she resumed her run, seeking shelter behind a cluster of snow-covered rocks. Sasha felt adrenaline pump, a last resort. He couldn't fight 700 leopards, but he could be an unpredictable target. He began to move in a zigzag to the opposite side, towards a more open area where the snow was deeper. Each step was agony, but he forced his feet to lift and sink, creating a visible trail. The closest leopards, attracted by the erratic movement and sound, began to change direction, their slender bodies gliding through the snow. Their growls became more intense, a chorus of hunger. He knew he was playing with death. Lena's image was a shield against fear. He was the older brother, the protector. It was his duty. Ancestral wisdom guided his calculated movements. He used predatory instinct against the predators themselves, transforming himself into a more interesting prey than the small and agile Lena, who was now gaining precious ground. Some of the fastest leopards were already a few meters from him. Sasha could feel the imminent danger. He didn't look back, but he knew Lena was gaining precious meters. He needed more time. With a guttural cry, he threw the piece of wood with all his remaining strength, making it ricochet off an ice-covered rock. The sharp, unexpected sound made the vanguard of the pack recoil for an instant, a momentary lapse of surprise. This delay was vital. Sasha used the momentum to throw himself forward, rolling behind a snowdrift. It was a momentary visual barrier. He was gasping for breath, but a faint smile crossed his lips. Lena was further away. He had bought time. The fight was far from over, but he had achieved the impossible, diverting the attention of a colossal pack. He was the bait, hoping Lena could finally reach safety. Sasha, gasping and trembling, felt the biting cold of the snow penetrate his thin clothes as he huddled behind the makeshift mound. The thin air tore at his throat with each painful breath. His muscles burned with excruciating pain. There was no time for rest. He heard the growls and heavy footsteps of the leopards, the colossal pack regrouping, their instincts sharpened. They would not give up easily. Lena, in turn, ran with a strength she didn't know she possessed. Her lungs burned, the ice on her cheeks a constant reminder of the environment's cruelty. She looked back for a second, just enough to see Sasha's silhouette, small and vulnerable, surrounded by the predators. Despair squeezed her heart, but her brother's courage propelled her. She reached the rocks, a dark, jagged cluster, and hid, curling up in the tight space, her body trembling with cold and fear. Sasha knew the snowdrift was only a temporary disguise. He needed more. His mind, despite extreme fatigue, worked quickly, seeking a new strategy. The wisdom of his people about how wind and snow could be allies came to the fore. He remembered his grandfather, who told how Yakut hunters used air currents to spread smoke and disorient large groups of animals. With monumental effort, Sasha dragged himself to the edge of the snowdrift, watching the leopards. Their yellow eyes gleamed with relentless ferocity. He needed to create a bigger distraction, something that would definitively draw them away from Lena. His eyes swept the horizon. There was no smoke, no fire, but there was the wind, always the wind, a constant and relentless companion in Yakutia. He noticed a small accumulation of loose, dry snow, almost powder, near a crevice in the rocks. An idea, born of desperation and ancestral memory, flashed in his mind. If he could kick up that snow, the wind would spread it, creating a white curtain that would confuse the leopard's keen senses, smell and sight, for a brief but crucial period. With the last drop of energy, Sasha propelled himself out of the shelter, ignoring the lacerating pain that seemed to tear every nerve. He ran, or rather stumbled, towards the crevice, his steps heavy and clumsy in the snow. The leopards, seeing his movement, roared and accelerated, lunging towards him. It was a race against time, a desperate gamble. He reached the crevice, kneeling with difficulty. With his bare, frozen hands, he began to frantically dig in the loose snow, throwing it upwards with all his remaining strength. The wind, like an invisible ally, caught the flakes and lifted them, creating a dense white cloud that spread rapidly. The ephemeral snow curtain began to obscure the predator's vision, who hesitated, confused by the sudden veil. The closest leopards stopped, sniffing the air, their growls turning into grunts of uncertainty. The white cloud, driven by the icy wind, advanced among them, breaking their formation. Sasha, exhausted, but with a glimmer of hope, saw the opportunity. He had to maintain the distraction, even if it meant remaining exposed for longer. He continued to dig and throw snow upwards, transforming himself into a focal point of the artificial storm. Lena, peeking through the rocks, saw the snow cloud form. She didn't fully understand what Sasha was doing, but she felt it was another of his courageous maneuvers to protect her. A tear of gratitude and terror ran down her face, freezing instantly. She knew her brother was risking everything. The sight of the white cloud, though confusing, gave her new breath. She needed to find more permanent shelter so Sasha's sacrifice would not be in vain. The struggle for survival in Yakutia was a cruel dance, and Sasha danced with death so she could live. Sasha, lungs burning, every fiber screaming, watched the snow cloud he had created, an ephemeral white veil that Yakutia's icy wind wove and unwove. The growls of the snow leopards, previously muffled, intensified, dark figures emerging from the mist. The distraction wouldn't last long. His bloodshot and almost frozen eyes swept the terrain, seeking new hope, a strategy for Lena. The cold bit his skin, but the physical pain was a whisper compared to the agony of seeing his sister in danger. Lena, heart pounding, felt the burning in her lungs subside as she nestled deep among the rocks. The precarious shelter offered a respite from the wind and hungry gazes. She heard the leopard's growls, more distant, but still menacing. The image of Sasha throwing snow upwards, an act of desperation and love, burned in her mind. He was out there, alone, facing death for her. Overwhelming guilt struck her, but was soon replaced by determination. She needed to be strong, to find a way for herself, and to honor her brother's sacrifice. Her small, numb fingers fumbled at the rock, seeking a safer hiding place. Sasha noticed the colossal pack reorganizing. The leopards instinctively bypassed the snow cloud, some heading towards him, others flanking Lena. He couldn't allow it. The wisdom of his people about using the terrain to his advantage echoed. There was a small ravine, almost invisible in the snow, a dangerous slope of thin ice. It was a treacherous shortcut, but his only chance to create a natural barrier between the predators and Lena. With renewed breath, Sasha emerged from the crevice. His movements, slow and uncoordinated, carried unwavering love. He pointed towards the ravine, a desperate and risky move. The leopards, seeing him, lunged with renewed vigor, growling in a chorus of fury. Sasha, his eyes fixed on the ravine, needed to get there first. The pain in his legs was unbearable, but he ignored it, focused on Lena's safety. He stumbled, slipping and getting back up in the snow, each fall a cruel reminder of exhaustion. The first leopards were a few meters away, yellow eyes gleaming with the hunt. Sasha, with a hoarse cry, threw himself forward, sliding down the icy slope of the ravine. The impact was brutal, eliciting a groan, but he didn't stop. Using hands and feet, he propelled himself downwards, feeling the thin ice creak under his weight, a dangerous melody. The leopards, surprised, hesitated at the edge of the ravine. The thin ice was a trap, heavy bodies not made for instability. They growled, frustrated, some seeking a safe path or retreating. Sasha had created a new barrier, a natural obstacle that would keep them away. He huddled at the bottom of the ravine, gasping for breath, his body trembling uncontrollably. The pain was excruciating, but a ray of hope shone in his eyes. He had bought more time. Lena, peeking through a crevice in the rocks, saw Sasha disappear into the ravine. Her heart leaped with fear, but she saw the leopards retreat, confused. Relief and anguish flooded her. Sasha was hurt, but alive. He had succeeded again. With new courage, she decided she couldn't stay still. A larger crevice, promising safe shelter, lay ahead. She crawled out of her hiding place, muscles aching, but her mind focused. Each step was an act of faith in her brother's love, a love that defied death in relentless Yakutia. Lena, with aching muscles, crawled out of the precarious shelter, her eyes fixed on the larger crevice. The icy wind whipped her face, but the image of Sasha risking everything infused her with renewed strength. Every step was a struggle in the deep snow, but she refused to yield. Her brother's love was her invisible shield. Finally, she reached the crevice, a wider and safer space, nestling in, exhausted, but with her heart a little calmer, though still tight with the anguish that consumed her. At the bottom of the icy ravine, Sasha felt every bone protest. The impact of the fall had been brutal, sharp pain radiating from his shoulder. He was huddled, trembling, not only from the 70 Wunderküsse cold, but from extreme exhaustion. His eyes watched the 700 snow leopards at the edge, growling in frustration. The thin ice prevented them from descending. Sasha knew the barrier was temporary. He needed something to drive them away, or to give Lena time for a definitive refuge. Ancestral wisdom echoed. Lena, more protected, tried to calm her breathing. The leopard's growls reached her, but seemed more distant, muffled by the rocks. She hugged herself, trying to warm her tiny body, and closed her eyes, Sasha in her mind. He was brave, her tireless protector. She wondered if he was okay. A tear ran down, freezing, but she wiped it away. She couldn't cry. She needed to think, to be useful, to honor her brother's sacrifice. If Sasha fought, she also had to fight. Her eyes opened, searching for something. Sasha, with a muffled groan, tried to move his injured shoulder. The pain was excruciating, a stabbing sensation, but he needed to get up. The ravine offered shelter, but it was a trap. If the leopards found a way down, he would be cornered. He needed to get out of there to continue being the distraction, the bait for Lena. His eyes, more alert, noticed loose stones on the opposite slope above the predators. A dangerous but effective idea emerged. Cause a landslide to scare them, buying more time. With Herculean effort, Sasha began to drag himself up the slope of the ravine, each movement a torment. He used hands and feet, nails scratching the ice and snow, seeking support. The cold penetrated his torn clothes, and the icy wind seemed to suck his last vital energy. The leopards at the edge watched him, yellow eyes following him. They growled as if they understood. Sasha knew he was taking an immense risk. If he fell, it would be the end. But Lena depended on him. He could not give up. With each inch, the pain increased. But the image of Lena, safe, was his only focus. Lena, feeling a chill, opened her eyes and looked out of the crevice. She saw Sasha, a tiny and determined figure, climbing the ravine with superhuman difficulty. Her heart tightened with fear and admiration. He was wounded, exhausted, but he fought bravely. She saw the leopards at the edge, watching him, and felt icy terror. He was in danger. She needed to do something. Her eyes searched her new shelter. She noticed a sharp piece of ice, almost a knife, on the ground. It was small, but useful. With trembling hands, she picked it up. She didn't know how, but she needed to help Sasha. Sasha, gasping for breath and his body on the verge of collapse, reached the top of the ravine slope near the loose stones. He clung to a ledge, his fingers numb. The leopards, seeing him so close, intensified their growls. Some tried to approach, but the thin ice was an impediment. With a last effort, Sasha pushed the stones, making them roll. The sound of the landslide startled the predators, who recoiled, confused and irritated. He had gained more seconds for Lena, but he knew it wouldn't be enough. The fight continued, and the cold, exhaustion and pain were relentless enemies, and he needed a final plan. His eyes, almost closed by exhaustion, swept the landscape. There were no more stones to slide, no crevices to create snow clouds. Sasha's body cried out for rest, but the image of Lena, so small and defenseless, prevented him from giving in. He was the last bastion between her and the hungry pack. Ancestral wisdom, so present in his mind, now seemed a distant whisper, muffled by pain and despair. What else could he do? He was exposed, an easy target, and the leopards, though momentarily retreated, were regrouping, their growls becoming more audible, more menacing. Lena, in turn, felt her heart in her throat. She watched Sasha, a fragile figure against the white immensity, facing the horde alone. That sharp piece of ice in her hand seemed insignificant, but the determination in her childish eyes was unwavering. She couldn't stand still. Sasha was hurt, and she needed to do more than just hide. The guilt of being a burden mingled with a fierce love for her brother. If he risked his life for her, she would risk hers for him too. Her eyes scanned the ceiling of the crevice where she was. Above her, a thick layer of ice and snow had accumulated, forming a small, unstable ledge. It was an immense risk, but a bold idea sprouted in her mind. If she could bring down that mass of ice and snow, perhaps it would create an even greater distraction, or even a temporary barrier between Sasha and the predators. It was a desperate action, but the only one she saw. With the courage that only love can inspire, Lena stood up, her aching muscles protesting. She raised the sharp piece of ice with her small hands, and with all the strength she possessed, began to strike the base of the ice ledge above her. Each blow was weak but determined, a dry, repetitive sound, barely audible above the wind. Her arms trembled, the cold froze her fingers, but she continued, visualizing Sasha, his safety. Suddenly, with a loud crack that echoed through the clearing, the ledge gave way. A cascade of ice and snow collapsed from the crevice with a surprising roar, raising a dense white cloud that spread rapidly. The noise and the sudden curtain of snow caught the snow leopards by surprise. The pack, which was already preparing to advance on Sasha, hesitated again. Some growled, confused, others instinctively recoiled, disoriented by the new and unexpected visual and auditory obstacle. Sasha, who was about to give in to despair, heard the roar and saw the new snow cloud. His eyes widened. He turned, seeking the origin, and saw Lena, small and determined, at the entrance of the crevice, the piece of ice still in her hands. A wave of shock and overwhelming pride hit him. Lena, his small and fragile sister, had acted. She wasn't just fleeing, she was fighting. Her unexpected and courageous act not only created a new barrier, but rekindled the flame of hope in Sasha's exhausted chest. He was not alone. Together, they would face whatever came. Sasha, his heart swollen with a pride that surpassed physical pain, saw Lena. His eyes, previously clouded by exhaustion, shone with a new light. He was no longer alone. That small figure, whom he had sworn to protect with his own life, now fought by his side, with the same ancestral courage that ran in their veins. A faint, almost imperceptible smile curved his cold, cracked lips. The snow cloud Lena had created, though ephemeral, had reinforced the barrier between them and the pack, giving them precious breathing room. The leopards, visibly irritated and confused, growled louder, some scratching the ravine's ice with sharp claws, others sniffing the air with dilated nostrils, trying to decipher the multiple scents and movements. Their predatory instinct was strong, but human cunning, driven by a brother's unwavering love for his sister, proved to be a formidable adversary. Lena, in turn, felt a mixture of fear and a strange euphoria. Her arms ached, her hands were numb, but the sight of Sasha, looking at her with that sparkle in his eyes, filled her with a strength she didn't know she possessed. She had helped. She was no longer just the sister to be protected, but an active part of the fight. The guilt that oppressed her diminished, replaced by a fierce determination. She clutched the piece of ice in her hand, a talisman of her own courage. Her eyes, now more attentive, scanned the interior of the crevice, searching for something more. She needed to find a place where she could hide more securely, a refuge that Sasha no longer needed to risk his life to protect. Sasha, despite his throbbing shoulder and a body that cried out for surrender, knew the pause was brief. The pack would not give up. He needed a plan that used the new dynamic between them, a silent collaboration that now united them even more. The wisdom of his people taught that sometimes the best defense was unity, even at a distance. He raised his free hand, pointing east towards a denser rock formation, almost a small cave, which he had noticed before. It was a place that would offer more lasting shelter from the cold and the predators. If Lena could get there, perhaps he could create one last, definitive distraction. Lena saw Sasha's gesture. Their eyes met for an instant, a silent communication of love and understanding. She nodded, a small determination on her pale face. With a last look at her brother, she turned and, with difficulty, began to move out of the crevice towards the indicated point. Each step was a battle against the deep snow and exhaustion, but she clung to Sasha's image, to the promise of safety. The leopards, noticing Lena's movement, let out growls of renewed fury. The snow cloud began to dissipate, and the smaller prey was again in motion. Sasha, seeing the pack react, knew he had to act fast. He could not allow them to reach Lena. With a hoarse cry, he propelled himself out of the ravine, ignoring the searing pain. He began to run, or rather to stumble, in a direction opposite to Lena's, drawing the predator's attention to himself once more. He was the bait, and now, with Lena also moving, the strategy was to divide the pack's attention. It was an act of pure sacrifice, but he trusted Lena. He ran with the strength of desperation, every muscle screaming, but the love for his sister was a fire that kept him warm, a flame that refused to extinguish. The fastest leopards launched into pursuit, their slender bodies gliding through the snow with terrifying agility. Sasha could feel their icy breath on his neck, the smell of predator in the air. He knew he was at his limit, but he couldn't stop. Lena needed more time. He looked back for an instant, seeing Lena approaching the rock formation. She was almost there. A ray of hope struck him. He had succeeded. Now he just had to hold on a little longer, be the shield, the final diversion. Yakutia, with its cruel and relentless beauty, watched this demonstration of love and resilience, a testament to the indomitable spirit that flourished even in the most inhospitable conditions on Earth. Sasha ran, but it was a miracle his feet still supported him. Each stride in the deep snow was an agonizing effort, his muscles burning, his lungs on fire. The icy air cut his throat and his injured shoulder throbbed with a searing pain that threatened to bring him down at any moment. He could hear the growls of the snow leopards, now closer, the guttural sound echoing in his ears like a sentence. The strong, wild scent of the predators filled the air, a constant reminder of imminent death. He dared not look back again, but he felt their presence, the relentless speed with which they approached. His eyes were fixed on a point ahead, a small elevation in the snow-covered terrain, a potential distraction. His grandfather's wisdom about how snow and wind could be allies and enemies returned to his mind. He needed a new trick, something to gain a few more precious seconds for Lena. Her image, small and brave, reaching the rocky crevice, was the only thing keeping him on his feet. He could not fail. Not after everything. Lena, gasping for breath, finally reached the rock formation. It was more than a crevice. It was a small recess, a natural shelter that offered welcome protection from the icy wind and, more importantly, from the hungry eyes of the leopards. She squeezed inside, her tiny body fitting perfectly into the tight, dark space. The relief was immense, a deep sigh that released some of the tension in her chest. But the calm was short-lived. Her ears still caught the distant growls, and the image of Sasha, running desperately, burned in her mind. He was out there, alone, facing the colossal pack for her. Guilt and fear returned, but now mixed with a new determination. She was no longer the defenseless girl. Sasha had taught her to fight, to survive. With trembling hands, she fumbled at the rocky walls, searching for something she could use. She found some loose stones, small but heavy. With an effort, she piled them at the entrance of the small cave, creating a makeshift barrier. It wasn't much, but it was a gesture, a way to contribute, to protect herself so that Sasha's sacrifice would not be in vain. Her eyes, now more mature, watched the landscape through a small crack, searching for Sasha, searching for a sign of hope. Sasha, his vision blurred and his body on the verge of collapse, reached the elevation. It was an irregular snowdrift with some exposed rocks. The leopards were a few meters away, their yellow eyes gleaming in the icy twilight. He knew he no longer had the strength to run. It had to be now. With a hoarse cry, Sasha threw himself against one of the rocks, using the impact to unbalance himself and roll down the side of the mound. He didn't roll far, but the unexpected movement and the cloud of snow that rose with his falling body caught the predators by surprise. They hesitated, some stopping abruptly, others slipping on the loose snow. Sasha, gasping for breath, took advantage of the momentary confusion. He couldn't fight 700 leopards, but he could use the terrain and surprise. He dragged himself behind a larger rock, hiding, his body trembling uncontrollably. The pain was excruciating, but the adrenaline still kept him conscious. He needed a plan, a last and desperate plan. His eyes swept the landscape, searching for anything, any clue. He noticed a small gorge, almost a narrow canyon, a little further on. It was dangerous. full of ice and accumulated snow, but perhaps it was the only way out. Lena, from inside her small cave, saw Sasha's maneuver. Her heart leaped when he threw himself, but then she saw the leopards recoil, confused. A small smile of relief mixed with anguish curved her lips. He was so smart, so brave. She knew he was exhausted, injured, but he didn't give up. This was the strength of the Yakut people, the resilience that flourished in adversity. She clutched the stones in her hand, feeling the connection with her brother, an invisible current of love that united them. She needed to trust him, and he needed to know that she was safe, that his sacrifice was not in vain. Her eyes, now more accustomed to the gloom of the cave, noticed a small crack in the wall from which a faint breath of air came. Could there be a passage, a deeper path into the rock? It was a tenuous hope, but she clung to it. Sasha, hidden behind the rock, watched the leopards regroup. They wouldn't take long to discover his hiding place. The idea of the gorge pulsed in his mind. It was a suicidal gamble, but the only one left. If he could lure them there, perhaps the thin ice or unstable snow could create an insurmountable obstacle, or even a landslide that would permanently drive them away. With a last breath, Sasha stood up, ignoring the pain that tore through him. He exposed himself again, a small and fragile target against the white vastness. The leopards saw him and let out a chorus of furious growls. Lunging towards him with renewed ferocity, Sasha began to run again, this time towards the gorge, each step an act of pure will. He could feel the ground trembling under the weight of the pack in pursuit. He was at his limit, but Lena was safe, and that was all that mattered. He was the shield, the final diversion, and he would keep his promise, whatever the cost. Yakutia, with its cruel and relentless beauty, watched this demonstration of love and resilience, a testament to the indomitable spirit that flourished even in the most inhospitable conditions on earth. Sasha felt the ground tremble, every fiber screaming in protest. The icy air burned his lungs, his injured shoulder throbbed. He couldn't stop. His eyes, almost closed by exhaustion, fixed on the gorge ahead, a dark and treacherous crevice. It was a desperate gamble, a labyrinth of ice and snow, the only chance to divert the predators. He heard the furious growls of the 700 leopards at his neck, their wild scent almost unbearable. The image of Lena, safe, was his only beacon, the flame that refused to extinguish. He was the shield, the final diversion. He would keep his promise, whatever the cost. Lena, nestled in her cave, felt the cold rock, but a strange warmth spread in her chest. Sasha was out there, facing death for her, and she couldn't stand still. Her eyes returned to the crack in the wall from which the breath of air came. With the sharp piece of ice, she began to widen the opening, scraping the ice and snow with determination. Each scrape was an effort, her fingers aching with the cold. But the idea of a deeper refuge, where Sasha no longer needed to worry, propelled her. She visualized her brother's exhausted face, the courage in his eyes. The crack gave way, revealing a narrow passage that deepened. It was a risk, but the promise of safety for Sasha was greater than any fear. Sasha, with a last effort, plunged into the gorge. The terrain was more treacherous. Thin ice sheets covered crevices, and accumulated snow formed unstable ledges. The leopards, in hot pursuit, hesitated at the entrance, sniffing the danger. Sasha took advantage of the pause. He knew he couldn't fight, but he could use Yakutia's nature against them. He spotted a large mass of snow and ice hanging precariously on one of the canyon walls, above a narrow passage. If he could bring it down, he would create a temporary barrier, an obstacle that would force them to another path, gaining precious time. With his throbbing shoulder and muscles in agony, Sasha climbed the slippery wall of the gorge, using ledges and cracks in the ice. The leopards, realizing his intention, growled furiously, and some tried to follow him, but the steep terrain prevented them. Sasha, with numb fingers and gasping for breath, reached the mass of snow. With a hoarse cry, he propelled himself, using his weight to destabilize the ledge. The snow and ice gave way with a roar, collapsing into the narrow passage, raising a dense cloud that filled the gorge. The improvised avalanche was enough. The leopards retreated en masse, growling and snorting, disoriented by the noise and the snow curtain. Some tried to advance, but the passage was blocked by a wall of unstable ice and snow, with the risk of a new landslide. Sasha, exhausted, slid down the wall, falling to his knees. His body trembled, the pain in his shoulder almost unbearable. He had succeeded. He had created a barrier, bought more time. He looked at the icy sky, a silent prayer on his cracked lips, a thanks to his ancestors for their strength. Lena, from inside the crevice, heard the roar and felt the rock vibrate. Her heart pounded, but it was no longer paralyzing fear. She peeked through the opening, but the snow cloud obscured her view. The leopard's growls seemed more distant, more frustrated. A smile of hope, mixed with tears of relief, appeared on her face. Sasha had done something incredible. With the new passage more accessible, she crawled inside, the darkness swallowing her, but the hope of a safe refuge was brighter than the cold outside. She needed to find a way, not just for herself, but for the brother who risked everything. Sasha, prostrate on the ice, felt every heartbeat reverberate in his aching bones. The icy air entered and left his lungs in short gasps. The barrier of snow and ice brought down in the gorge was a momentary victory, a breath stolen from imminent death. The muffled growls of the leopards echoed through the ice walls, a constant reminder of the contained threat. His eyes, heavy with fatigue, swept the gorge, searching for a sign for Lena. The promise to protect her was the only warmth that sustained him, a stubborn flame in the 70 Wimbledon's cold. He dragged himself closer to the barrier, feeling the instability of the ice. He knew nature was unpredictable. The barrier could give way at any moment. He needed to move, to find Lena, before it was too late. Lena, meanwhile, advanced through the dark passage, the sharp piece of ice in her hands, now a support. The darkness was almost total, only a pale reflection of the external snow. The air in the crevice was less biting, but the icy dampness made her bones ache. Each step was cautious, her feet sinking into the soft snow. She fumbled at the walls, feeling the rough rock and ice. The smell of damp earth and mineral filled the air, different from the icy cold outside. The hope of a safe refuge for Sasha and herself propelled her. She visualized a place where her brother could rest, away from the leopards. Her grandmother's voice, about the strength in the hidden places of the earth, echoed in her mind. Suddenly, the passage widened. Lena blinked, her eyes adjusting to the gloom, and realized she was in a larger chamber, a natural cave. The ceiling was high, and a faint light came from a crevice above, revealing ice stalactites hanging like crystalline chandeliers. In the center of the cave, there was a bubbling spring, gently steaming despite the extreme cold. It was a miracle of nature, an oasis of life amidst the frozen vastness. Her eyes widened. It was more than a refuge, it was a sanctuary. But the joy was brief. She heard a distant growl, stronger than before, coming from somewhere above the cave. The leopards were trying to find an alternative path, and they seemed to be close. Sasha was still out there in danger. Sasha, realizing that the leopards' growls were intensifying and seemed to come from above, felt a shiver run down his spine. They were bypassing the barrier, seeking a weak point. He couldn't stay there, waiting. He needed to act. The pain in his shoulder was a constant torture, but the image of Lena, so close to a refuge, yet still vulnerable, propelled him. He stood up with difficulty, his knees trembling. Ancestral wisdom, which spoke of the interconnectedness of all beings and the earth, whispered in his mind. He needed to use the environment to his advantage, not just to block, but to guide. He noticed a series of small ledges on the opposite wall of the gorge, forming a kind of natural ladder. It was risky, but perhaps it would lead to a higher point, from where he could get a better view or even find an entrance to Lena's cave. With determination etched on his exhausted face, Sasha began to climb. Each movement was slow and painful, his fingers slipping on the ice. He heard the leopard's growls getting closer and closer, the sound of claws scratching the rock above him. They were finding a way. He needed to be faster. Lena, in the cave, felt the ground tremble slightly. The growl was louder, closer. She looked at the crevice above, from where the light and now the sound came. Her eyes fixed on the bubbling spring. A bold idea, inspired by urgency and love, began to form in her mind. The water, even if not warm, was a different element, a surprise. She picked up more loose stones, larger this time, and dragged them near the spring. If the leopards found an entrance, she would need a defense. Sasha, with a last effort, reached the top of the ledge. The view was desolate. The leopards were spreading out, some already at the top of the gorge, sniffing the air, their eyes fixed on the area where Lena was. He was exposed, a target, but then he saw it, a crevice, almost imperceptible, in the rock that seemed to lead downwards into the heart of the mountain. It was the entrance to Lena's cave. He could feel the faint warmth coming from it. A smile of hope, mixed with despair, appeared on his lips. He had found the way, but the leopards had too. They were approaching, and he needed a final distraction, one that would keep them away from Lena forever. He knew what he had to do. It was the only chance. He looked at the vast frozen plain, at Yakutia's grey sky, and invoked the strength of his ancestors. He would be the sacrifice. Sasha took a deep breath, the icy air burning his lungs. The leopards, a dark and menacing blur, advanced. Without strength, he invoked ancestral wisdom and his love for Lena. His eyes fixed on a natural bridge of ice and snow, thin and arched over a deep crevice, a hidden abyss. It was an insane risk, but the only chance to divert the pack. With a hoarse cry, Sasha propelled himself, running towards the bridge, each step an agony. The pain in his shoulder was a fire, his body a burden, but Lena was the force that drove him. The leopards, ravenous, fell for the bait, accelerating the chase. Sasha felt the ground tremble, their icy breath on his neck. He was at his limit, but he couldn't stop. He reached the ice bridge, narrow and treacherous. The ice cracked under his feet. Without hesitation, Sasha threw himself to the other side, barely managing to keep his balance. The first leopards were already on the bridge. The combined weight was too much. With a deafening crack, the bridge gave way. The ice broke, and the snow opened in a white cascade, revealing the dark crevice below. Growls of fury and surprise erupted from the pack. The leopards on the bridge fell into the crevice, while the others stopped abruptly at the edge of the abyss. The confusion was total. They growled, but the insurmountable obstacle made them hesitate. Sasha, on the other side, prostrate in the snow, gasping for breath. Heart-pounding uncontrollably, had succeeded, exhausted, wounded, but alive. The pack was divided, disoriented. Lena, in the cave, felt the earth tremble and the distant roar, followed by growls and a tense silence. Her heart leaped. She dragged herself to the crack of light peeking out. The snow cloud dissipated, revealing the broken ice bridge, the dark crevice, and leopards trapped on the other side, growling in frustration. She saw Sasha, small and fragile, on the other side of the abyss, fallen in the snow, but alive. Relief and love flooded her. He had saved her. Guilt gave way to determination. Sasha was exhausted, but she was safe. She needed him to join her. With trembling hands, she fumbled at the cave walls, searching for the deeper crevice. She needed a place for them to hide, for Sasha to rest. The bubbling spring called, a promise of life and hope. She needed to be strong for him. Sasha, his vision blurred, tried to stand up. His muscles screamed, but he needed to reach Lena. The crevice in the rock, the cave entrance, seemed so close, but the distance was an abyss of pain and exhaustion. The leopards on the other side, still growling, were unable to cross. Ancestral wisdom whispered, "Nature gives and nature takes. Use what it offers you." He noticed a cluster of rocks and snow that projected from the gorge wall, forming a makeshift ramp. It was a dangerous path, but the only way to reach the cave without exposing himself to the predators. With a last breath of courage, Sasha began to drag himself, each movement a battle. He was the shield, the diversion, and now the link that needed to reconnect. Yakutia, with its cruel and relentless beauty, watched this demonstration of love and resilience, a testament to the indomitable spirit that flourished even in the most inhospitable conditions on Earth. Sasha, his vision blurred and his body on the verge of collapse, dragged himself along the makeshift ramp of rocks and snow. Each movement was torture, his muscles screaming in protest, his injured shoulder throbbing with searing pain. The icy air burned his lungs, but the image of Lena, safe inside the cave, was a balm for his exhausted soul. He felt the ground tremble beneath his knees and hands, the echo of the leopard's growl still reverberating. Though more distant, frustrated by the crevice in the abyss, the wisdom of his ancestors, which spoke of the strength that resides in perseverance, was the melody that propelled him. He was not just a boy. He was his sister's guardian, the last link of his family. Lena, inside the cave, felt the cold rock, but a strange stillness had settled after the roar. The leopard's growls seemed to have diminished, replaced by a tense silence. Her eyes, now fully adapted to the gloom, explored the chamber. The bubbling spring in the center radiated a subtle warmth, an invitation to life. She knew Sasha was coming. She could feel the urgency of his love. With her small hands, she began to smooth the snow on the ground near the spring, creating a softer space, a makeshift bed for her exhausted brother. The darkness no longer frightened her. It was a protective cloak, a refuge. She visualized Sasha's face, the courage in his eyes, and a new strength bloomed in her own heart. She was no longer the defenseless girl. She was the sister who waited, who prepared the way for well-deserved rest. With a last, agonizing effort, Sasha reached the crevice. He squeezed through, his body scraping the icy rock, and finally fell into the chamber. The air was less biting, the smell of damp earth and mineral replacing Yakutia's icy cold. He raised his head, his vision blurred, and saw Lena. She was there, small, but her eyes shining with the light of hope and relief. A faint smile of pure exhaustion and love appeared on his cracked lips. Lena ran to him, kneeling by his side. Her eyes filled with tears as she saw her brother's state, his face dirty with snow and earth, his shoulder bleeding, his body trembling uncontrollably. But he was alive. She hugged him with all the strength she had, an embrace that conveyed all the accumulated fear, relief, and love. Sasha returned the hug, feeling the warmth of her small body, the only thing that mattered. He had succeeded. They were safe. Lena helped him drag himself near the bubbling spring to the soft snowbed she had prepared. Sasha lay down, his body relaxing for the first time in days. The subtle steam from the water rose, warming the air around them. The leopard's growls outside were just a distant echo, muffled by the cave walls. They were safe. That natural sanctuary, a miracle amidst the frozen vastness, was proof that life always finds a way, even in the most inhospitable conditions. Sasha closed his eyes, but not to sleep. He felt Lena's small hand hold his, an unbreakable bond. The love for his sister, the strength of his people, the resilience that flourished in adversity, all this had propelled him. He had faced tigers and leopards, cold and hunger, but the greatest challenge had been to keep hope alive, and he had won. Lena, by his side, watched him, her heart overflowing with gratitude and admiration. In that moment, in the quietness of the cave, they were not just two orphans in a cruel world. They were the living testament to the indomitable spirit of Yakutia, to the strength of love that overcomes everything. Sasha slept, a deep and well-deserved sleep, dragging him away from pain and terror. Lena watched him, sitting by his side, her small hand still holding his. The steam from the bubbling spring enveloped them like an embrace, and the silence of the cave was a balm. She wiped her brother's face with clean snow, feeling the roughness of his wind and cold-burned skin. Her eyes scanned every scratch, every spot of dried blood. Tenderness and gratitude flooded her. He was her hero, protector, her beacon. Hours passed, or perhaps a day. Time lost its meaning in that refuge. The leopard's growls had ceased. Hunger gnawed at Lena's stomach, but she dared not move. She remembered the moss-covered stones. She scraped some off and chewed it, a bitter taste, but minimal sustenance. The spring water was pure and refreshing. She drank it in small sips, offering it to Sasha when he, in a brief semi-awakening, murmured for something. When Sasha finally opened his eyes, the faint light of the cave seemed like a celestial glow. He felt his body still aching, but the deep exhaustion had lessened. Lena was there, her eyes wide and full of concern, but also of unconditional love. He tried to smile, a slight tremor ran across his lips. "Lena," he whispered, his voice hoarse. She squeezed his hand. "You're safe, Sasha. We're safe." They remained in the cave, allowing Sasha's body to recover. The spring water and the moss on the stones offered the bare minimum for survival. With each hour, the hope that the leopards had dispersed grew. Ancestral wisdom spoke of patience, of observing nature's signs. The silence outside was the most eloquent sign. Finally, with strength renewed by the quietness and his sister's love, Sasha decided it was time to try. He stood up with difficulty, his shoulder still throbbing, but his mind clear. Lena helped him steady himself, her small arms offering support. Together, they moved towards the crevice that had led them to the cave. Cautiously, Sasha peeked out. The gorge was silent, the snow untouched, except for the marks of their passages, and more distantly, the tracks of the leopards moving away. The barrier of snow and ice he had created was still there, but there was no sign of the predators. They had given up, attracted by other prey, or simply exhausted from the chase. Yakutia's icy air greeted them again, but this time it seemed less hostile. The sky was clear, a deep blue that promised a new day. Sasha and Lena hugged tightly, relief washing over both their souls. The journey back to the village would be long and arduous, but they would make it together. As they walked side by side, Sasha felt Lena's hand in his, a warmth that defied the 71° cold. They were living proof that love, courage, and resilience overcome any adversity. The village welcomed them with tears and hugs, the news of their return spreading like fire on ice. Sasha and Lena, the orphans who faced 1,000 tigers and 700 leopards, became living legends. Witnesses to the indomitable spirit of the Yakut people, their hearts marked by trials, were filled with hope and a future built on love and the strength that flourishes even in the most inhospitable conditions on earth. With their hearts marked by trials, but full of hope, Sasha and Lena began a future built on love and the strength that flourishes even in the most inhospitable conditions on earth. In the days that followed, their small house, once silent, filled with a new and comforting warmth. The village women, with gentle hands and deep affection, cared for Sasha. They cleaned his wounds, applied herbal ointments to his aching shoulder, and fed him nutritious broths of reindeer and wild roots. Sasha, exhausted, allowed himself to be cared for, his body slowly responding to rest and nourishment. He slept deeply, but nightmares still haunted him. Vivid images of hungry eyes and icy growls. He would wake up gasping, his heart pounding, and find Lena sitting beside him, her small hand clutching his, a beacon of reality amidst the darkness of his memories. Lena, in turn, did not leave her brother's side. Her role had shifted from protected to guardian of Sasha's rest. She sat near him, observing every breath, every twitch on his face. The village elders taught her to prepare calming teas and to tell ancient stories of resilience, of how the land and the Yakut spirit always find a way. Lena absorbed every word, feeling that ancestral wisdom was not just for Sasha, but for her too. She remembered the cave, the bubbling spring, and the feeling of having found a refuge, discovering an inner strength she never imagined possessing. The community, more than celebrating, nurtured. The village men, previously focused on hunting, now looked at Sasha with silent respect, an admiration that went beyond his young age. They saw him not just as a hero, but as the embodiment of the courage and altruism that defined their people. The village elder, with his wise and wrinkled eyes, sat with Sasha, not to praise him, but to listen. He spoke of the importance of carrying the memory of trials, not as a heavy burden, but as a source of wisdom. "Strength is not in being fearless, my son," the elder said, his voice deep and calm, "but in facing fear for those we love." Sasha, listening to the elder's words, felt a weight gradually lift from his shoulders. He was not alone. The entire village was his family, and the love that surrounded him was as vast and relentless as Yakutia itself. He looked at Lena, who was now playing with other children, a genuine smile lighting up her face. Her joy was his own healing. His eyes, once full of vigilance, began to see beauty in the small details, the sun's glint on the snow, the children's laughter, the warmth of the fire in the hearth. One afternoon, Sasha stood up feeling stronger. He walked to the edge of the village, Lena running to catch up with him. Together, they looked at the vast frozen plain, at the mountains that had witnessed their struggle. There was no more fear, only gratitude. Sasha took Lena's hand, his touch firm and protective. "We made it, Lena," he said, his voice clear and full of new conviction. "Always together." Lena smiled, her eyes reflecting the same hope. They had survived not just physically, but with spirits intact, enriched by the experience. Yakutia, in its wild beauty, remained their home, and they, Sasha and Lena, would be its future, a living testament that love and resilience can flourish even in the heart of the harshest winter.